So for this session, viewers, listeners, we have with us Miss Alithea Williams. She's the Campaigns and Parliamentary Assistant for the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, SPUC, and they're based in the United Kingdom. And they're actually the world's oldest pro-life campaigning and educational organization, having been founded in 1967. So we're very grateful to have Miss Williams with us today. Thank you so much for making time to speak with us.
Hello, it's really nice to talk to you today.
Great. So if you could briefly just share what is the work of SPUC?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we are one of the oldest campaigning organisations in the world. We are actually set up to oppose the 1967 Abortion Act when it was going through Parliament. So we're primarily a campaigning organisation, so we work at the political level. Obviously, initially it was fighting the bill when it came in. Clearly, we did not succeed at that, but since then it's been fighting any expansion of abortion. It's been responding to any bills that come up, and obviously trying to move back to a situation where we have a culture of life. So our big strength is that we're a membership organisation, so we have lots of members all throughout the country, tens of thousands of members, and so when things come up, we call upon those members to campaign. So if there's a bill in Parliament, we'll contact our supporters, ask them to write to their MPs, ask them to write to their local papers, just really putting on pressure that way. Obviously, over the years, what we do has expanded somewhat with other threats to human life. So we also campaign against euthanasia and abuse of embryos. That comes up as well.
Right. Thank you. You mentioned the exceptions in the law. Is it that abortion is not completely legal in the UK? What is the scenario? What is the situation under your law right now?
Yeah, so it's quite a tricky in some ways, because obviously we have a very long law, being a common law society. So there were various laws passed in the Victorian ages which prohibited abortion. And what happened in 1967 was an amendment was made to those laws allowing abortion in some circumstances. So what it technically does is says that the doctor would not be in criminal trouble if he performs an abortion under a certain set of circumstances. So actually the letter of the law is quite strict. If it was followed, we would not have very many abortions. But what's happened is one of these exceptions is that the mental health of the woman would suffer more than if she had the baby, which I'm sure you can tell is a very subjective thing, and actually it doesn't really go with any evidence. But what now happens is something like 98% of all abortions in the UK are done under that ground. So the doctor just ticks mental health. He or she doesn't even have to specify what this mental health might be. It's just what it is. We know for sure that that's completely abused. When there's been kind of recordings of the calls between the woman and the abortion provider, they'll say what their reason is, which can be, it might be family problems, it might be something very trivial. The abortion provider will go, well, I'll just put that down under ground C, mental health. So there's very few reasons. There's very few situations where a woman would not get an abortion if she wants one. Now, that ground is up to 24 weeks. So the general law is abortions can happen up to 24 weeks, except for there's the case of disability. That's another ground where if the baby has a disability or a suspected disability, because you don't have to prove it, then abortion can happen up to birth.
Well, that's a very important point that you made, Ms. Williams. I'm glad you did, because in Jamaica, where we're now faced with the campaign to legalize abortion, and our law is from the 1864 equivalent in the UK, where it is prohibited completely. There are no exceptions. And the arguments that we hear from the pro-abortion campaigners is to make an exception in the case of rape or incest and health of the mother. And here you're saying that your law is strict, but it has been so abused that health has been given this wide interpretation, then it is as if there are no exceptions. So that's very important for us to understand that the exceptions will be abused if it is allowed. Are there any statistics that you can share with us about the numbers of abortions that are taking place?
Yeah, so since 1967, there's been about 9.5 million abortions now in the UK. So we're
Annual.
seeing, sorry, that's all together.
Okay.
So that's since 1967. So we
Okay.
see about 200,000 abortions now every year. I mean, last year was actually the highest number on record, and mostly they are just going up. I mean, I know it's always said that, you know, legalizing abortion doesn't mean there's any more abortions, or, you know, or prohibiting it just means people seek unsafe abortions. That's just not what's happened anywhere in the world. You know, we have 200,000 abortions every year. I mean, we don't know for sure how many illegal abortions there were before 1967, but I don't think anybody would claim it was anything like 200,000. It would have been small numbers. And it's been, I think we've seen all over the world that people use statistics to their advantage, you know, to try and push this. If we go to the case of the United States, one of the people who pushed for abortion in the United States has said on record, because he converted, became a pro-lifer, that they were making up numbers of the numbers of illegal abortions that were happening. He was saying that, you know, 100,000 women are dying every year from illegal abortion. It was completely made up. It wasn't true. And I think that happens a lot. I'm interested that you say they're asking for an exception for rape, because that's something that sort of came up in Northern Ireland recently. So Northern Ireland, a bit of the UK, but has, until very recently, has not had an abortion because of different political situations, different religious situations. And there was, when they were bringing in this new law, people were looking at having an exception for rape. And what they found, I think understandably, that that's something that's very difficult to do, because you'd have to then prove that a woman has been raped. And obviously in that kind of situation, you don't want to be kind of forcing a woman to prove it or anything like that. So I think they found that is unworkable. And what they've just done is had abortion for any reason up to 12 weeks. And I think that's what generally happens. You can't really have an abortion law based around rape or incest, because, you know, how could you prove it? You shouldn't prove it. It's not really moral to try and prove it. So what you end up having is just a blanket rule that would cover that.
Thank you so much. And the gentleman you spoke of in terms of the fabrication of statistics, for our viewers, that's Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was called the abortion king in the US. But he did repent of what he had done and spent the rest of his life trying to undo the evil that he had facilitated, and became very much a pro-lifer. Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. Let's talk about something that happened in the early months of COVID last year in 2020, where the government sought to facilitate home abortions by permitting women to take pills at home. Can you just tell us a little bit of what happened with that policy directive?
Yes, so that was very dramatic. So yes, in March last year, almost a year ago now, it suddenly appeared on our Department of Health's website that doctors could, so they made it so that doctors could send women abortion pills in the post. So normally women have to go into a clinic where two doctors, at least officially, have to approve an abortion. So suddenly it came up that women didn't have to go in, and that doctors could prescribe from home, and they could do it over telemedicine. So there was some strange to and froing about this. It went up on the website, then it came down again, and the Department of Health said it was a mistake and this wasn't happening. And then in Parliament, a spokesman for the government said that it wasn't happening. And then within a few days, it was approved again. So we've had this situation now for the last year where a woman can call up the abortion provider, have a scripted kind of conversation, get the abortion approved. The abortion pills, the 2 pills, are sent to her in the post, and then she self-administers that abortion at home. So we've been campaigning about that for the last year. We've seen all sorts of problems with it. We feared all sorts of problems, and those have come true. And there has now been a government consultation on this, which has just ended. So we're waiting to see what the government says. So sorry, I should say that this was supposed to be a temporary policy for COVID, but this consultation was on making it permanent. So that's the fear, is what's going to happen next.
What are some of the other problems that you feared that actually were realized?
Yeah, so there's been all sorts of things happening with it. So the government imposed a limit of 10 weeks on these pills by post abortions, because medical abortions are only supposed to go up until about 10 weeks. So some say a bit later, but certainly not much later. So we've seen cases of women being sent these pills later in pregnancy, sometimes much later in pregnancy. There are a few really horrific cases in the press, a 28-week baby dying, a newborn baby. So really, like, that's over our normal legal limits and a long, long way over this 10-week limit. And we've since seen more statistics showing that this has happened a fair amount. It's also really impossible to regulate. So that's one of the things I first thought when this happened. How do you regulate this? And the answer is that you can't. So a colleague within the pro-life movement here did a mystery client investigation where women who were not pregnant, were volunteers, were calling up these abortion lines, giving false names, false pregnancy. Well, obviously they weren't pregnant, so all the information was false. And they went through this safeguarding interview, and all of those women received the pills, even though they weren't pregnant and they weren't real women in that sense. And some of the personas that these women were playing were being over the limit. They still got sent the pills. Some of them were acting out that they were being coerced, so having an abusive man next to them, making them say what they were going to say, and they couldn't pick up on that. And again, that was one of the things that we feared would be the case, and we think is that it just makes it so easy for abusers. When all you have to do is ring up, the abuser can force the woman to do that, and he can force her to take the pills. There's just no way of knowing. I mean, we're not defending what the law is like anyway, but at least before telemedicine, women would have to go into the clinic and they would be seen alone, so that however bad things were, you couldn't have the abusive man or whoever sitting next to her making her have the abortion, which now can happen. Obviously, it's not something we can really get statistics on at this stage, but there's been a huge spike in domestic abuse with all the lockdowns, people being stuck in their homes. So it's just inevitable that this will have happened. I mean, there are a few cases we've heard of. I could read out a quote from a woman who reported this to the Daily Mail. So, well, this woman actually it's not that she was coerced to have the abortion, but because she was in an abusive relationship, she ordered the pills, got them very quickly. And she suffered really badly physically from the pills. She said, the next day I felt really sick, faint and dizzy. I'm still bleeding even now a few weeks on. And this is the key point. Because my partner is here and doesn't know what I did, I've not been able to ring anyone for advice. So that's one of the other fears, that women would be stuck at home with only the abuser going through this awful situation. And as she said, this woman couldn't call anyone for help, even though there were complications and it had gone wrong. She said the pain was unbearable. I was lying on my bathroom floor, curled in a ball. I was sweating. My temperature was 39.8. I couldn't move. I had diarrhea. I was being sick. I was shivering, shaking, sweating. I thought I was going to die. And this kind of leads me on to the next point, that, you know, these abortion pills, it's not just take a pill and the baby goes away. The women do have to pass the pregnancy. It can be a really, really traumatic experience. Even if there's no abuse going on, going through that by yourself in your home, then your home is the scene of what's happened. Just the mental health implications for women are going to be terrible. And we've already seen some women coming forward and saying that.
Yes, thanks for sharing.
We thought this would happen, and it is.
And it did. Thanks for sharing that, Alithea, because here in Jamaica, the pro-abortion campaigners present this as completely a woman's issue and important for upholding women's rights and her freedom and her choice and her body, and how this is empowering. But the reality, as you're painting, and as we pro-lifers would know, that it is far from the truth, that the woman who is making that decision or trying to figure out what decision to make is in a situation of desperation or crisis or confusion. And as you say, abortion is enabling the abuser to get away with this abuse and cover up if there is a crime taking place, covering up the evidence of that crime. But then the pro-abortionists would say, well, what's your alternative? She is in a situation of need and crisis. What's your alternative? So you are a society for upliftment of life. What do you say and have done to say that this is the alternative to that woman or to that girl in that situation of crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is always we do always have to be very aware that these are real women we're talking about. These are often real crises, and the pro-life community always has to come together and make sure that there are alternatives for these women. I mean, it's not something we're directly involved in, because as I said, we're a campaigning organisation, but there are other caring organisations in this country. And we always campaign for the rights of pro-lifers to help women. I mean, so I think another big thing that's the case here is, so we will have, there are pro-lifers who will pray outside of abortion clinics and offer help to these women. And there's been a big move in recent years to try and stop this happening, to impose so-called buffer zones around abortion clinics. So even when women begin with this, being offered this last minute help, the abortion lobby doesn't want that to happen. Yeah, and I think it's just important. Yes, you mentioned very much so that a lot of women are coerced. We have a sister organisation called ARCH, which is the Abortion Recovery Care and Helpline, where women who have suffered abortion call up and get counselling. So that's kind of our big caring ministry that we do, because there's so much suffering after abortion. And as pro-lifers, we have to be there not just for women in crisis, but we also have to be there for them afterwards. Once they've had the abortion, it's not about judging women. It's about recognising that many of them are suffering. Many of them didn't know what they were going into, and they do need help and healing. And my colleague from ARCH thinks that about 75% of the women who contact them experience some form of pressure or coercion. And they don't always realise it. I think, when you think about forced abortion, you think of someone being kind of frog marched in and held down on a table. And most of the time it's not like that. What it is that the man in her life, the father, isn't supportive. He might not even realise he's not being supportive a lot of the time. Sometimes even saying, oh, it's your decision, that sounds supportive, but isn't, because that means that's all on the woman. Right. He's not there saying, yes, I will look after you, I will look after my child. Or it might be the girl's mother saying, oh, no, you're too young, this can't happen. So a lot of it can be sort of well-meaning and not what we think of as coercion, but it is. And there's all sorts of studies, suggesting that. So I think there's one study, it's like 64% of women questioned feeling pressure to abort, and even the Guttmacher Institute in the US, which is a pro-abortion institute, indicated that 30% of women who have abortions because someone else, not the woman, wants it. Obviously we can't claim that this is always the case, but it is a lot of the time. Right. And so much of what we hear of women coming out of abortion clinics is, not, this is my empowering choice. And I don't really believe that any woman thinks that. But so many of them say, I didn't have any other choice. That is it. So I think we just need to fight this idea that that there aren't other choices, and as pro-lifers do all we can to provide them.
Right. Thank you. What are women told, though, by the abortion providers as their counseling? Are they told the physical and emotional effects that are attendant on going through an abortion? What exactly are they counseled on, are you able to say?
I mean, I don't think that they're told very much. I mean, what we hear so much from women coming out is that they were not told. I mean, I think legally they do have to give some of the medical detail, but I don't think anything can quite prepare people for it. And you just don't hear of women going on to adopt or keep their babies much from going out there. And some of this counselling is so it's so quick. Particularly the case now we have this telemedicine. It's just a scripted call. They just go through it. It doesn't leave space. And actually a few years ago, even before the telemedicine came in, there were revelations that women were being signed off as giving consent after a phone call, sometimes of only like half a minute long. Well, I think the Daily Mail said 22-second phone calls. Wow. So it can be very quick, and I just don't believe that women are having that time. And something I think that the pro-abortion lobby like to say is that, once a woman's made her decision, that's it, she's made a decision. That's why they say they're so against people outside clinics. And, I don't think as women, we're not any different from men in that there's lots of factors in our lives. People don't just often make a decision which nothing else can influence. They're often very confused. There's a lot of ambivalence. There's all sorts of things that can be going on.
Right.
So I think this idea of the kind of empowered woman who's made her decision actually just is not reality, and it does a disservice to women who actually need that space to talk and perhaps be offered other help.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a couple more questions. Could you say something about the targeting of disabled babies or babies suspected to have some sort of disability or fetal abnormality? How is that being treated under your law and actually in fact in the UK?
Yes, so one of the exceptions which allows abortion in the UK is if there is disability or suspected disability. And because this law was passed in the 1960s, the language is not such that we would usually use today. It talks about a baby being severely handicapped. But I do think, yes, and so it is the case that something like 99% of babies with Down syndrome are aborted. The numbers for babies with spina bifida and other problems are similar. And babies can be aborted for things like a cleft palate or club foot. And I think it does really show contradictions in society, because we do quite often now have campaigns, particularly on behalf of the Down syndrome community, pointing out these hypocrisies, because obviously generally in society there's a big move to be accepting of people with disabilities and making sure everything is accessible, and that's all wonderful. But when you point out that there is this contradiction that abortion is allowed up to birth for that, whereas it's 24 weeks for other types of abortion. Up to birth, yeah. There's no limit. The 24 limit doesn't apply. Week limit doesn't apply. And what the pro-abortion lobby will say is, well, you sometimes don't pick up these fetal abnormalities in time for the 24-week limit. And I think one of the most disturbing things about it is that it's often presented as being a compassionate choice. You shouldn't bring a baby into the world that's like that. I don't want my baby to suffer. I think there's still a lot of, ignorance in the medical establishment, because we hear so often that women, families, when they receive a diagnosis of Down syndrome, particularly, that's the one that's most highlighted, they're not told the full picture about Down syndrome. They're often just kind of pushed along this abortion pathway, going, okay, here's your diagnosis, I can book an abortion for next week for you. And obviously that there are challenges with having a baby with disabilities, but they're not hearing, that people with Down syndrome can live long lives and bring so much joy to their families and are happy. So there has been a big push to have more balance on this. Mm-hmm. But, given that the numbers of the percentage of babies with Down syndrome being aborted is still so high, I don't think that it's really coming through. Yeah. So it is this real hypocrisy in society that, that any attempts to kind of equalize the law does not go down well.
And have you had cases where the doctor said there might be, or said that there is a finding of Down syndrome, but the parents decided to go ahead with the pregnancy and the baby was born normal, fine, there was no illness?
I can't think of any particular examples, but this happens all the time. Every few weeks you'll get a kind of, tabloid headline going, I was told to abort my baby 10 times and look, now she's wonderful.
Right.
It's so
the
common.
Doctors are wrong. The doctors can be wrong.
They are wrong. Doctors aren't gods. You don't always know. These tests aren't completely accurate. Right. They only give a risk factor of Down syndrome or whatever the condition is. And there has been campaigning not to talk of it as a risk factor, like there's not a risk if there's a chance. It's all about the language you use. If you tell a parent there's a 90% chance, 90% risk that their baby has Down syndrome, that instantly sounds like something bad, something that should be avoided, something that you ought to do something about.
Right. Well, Ms. Williams, thank you so much. Before you go, Privilege, just tell us where persons can get more information about SBUC and any final words or recommendations that you'd like to leave with us.
Yes, so you can go to our website, which is just www.spuc.org.uk. We're on social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, so do look up any of our stuff. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, and all the best with your fight over there in Jamaica. And yeah, fight the good fight. It's always worth it.
And is there anything that we can pray for you, for your organization, issues that you're dealing with right now that we can lift up in prayer for you as well?
Yeah, definitely. If you can pray for this this home abortion situation. So the government has been running a consultation on making this permanent. We've had people responding to it, but now the government will be preparing their report. So just pray for real wisdom there, and a turning back of this policy, which is so bad for women and so bad for babies.
Yes, it is. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Williams, and Lord continue to strengthen and fortify you and your organization in this fight for life. Thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you so much. God bless.
God bless. Bye-bye.